Hey, I think I'm going to talk for about maybe 50 minutes, an hour, and this talk is basically structured in 3 parts. I want to develop a notion of the relational thing. So the thing, the object, as a medium through which certain energies are being channeled that define and activate a social environment and potentially also transform it. So at first I want to develop some of these thoughts in a more general way and introduce you to some principles of sympathetic magic. Then I want to, in the second part, talk a little bit about the transformative potentials of sympathetic magic, especially about the in and out relationships. We've just heard that it's better to be inside. And in sympathetic magic, the relationships of what is inside and outside and the roles of the offices and all these things at some point become very, very flexible. And I'm looking at that as a potential for sculptural practice. Because I realize that in an age of connectivity, we still deal with input and output in a very disciplined manner. And I'm thinking to move from connectivity to real connectedness, we could learn a lot from sympathetic magic about how energy flows can actually be multi-directional and not just unidirectional. That's the second part. In the third part, I want to talk a little bit more about specific qualities that may be communicated or relayed through relational objects, namely the joy and the pain, and how through particular material rights society collectively experiences its joy and pain. That's the third part. I want to start with a short excerpt that for me is of a movie that for me started this whole thinking process. It's a video piece by the amazing Danish artist Gitte Willesen, whose work is very much about empathy, and she started her practice in a Scandinavian context, and in recent years then started traveling to Africa after she got to know about a particular musician from Gambia in Norway, where he was in a club where he was a frequent visitor. And she traveled to Gambia to talk to Amadou Assar about the magic function of amulets, but also about musical instruments. And I'm going to play you a short excerpt, which for me as a musician also is one of the most revealing and instructive comments I've ever heard about the magical function of the thing that is the musical instrument, and how the musical instrument activates the relationship between creatures in an environment. So this is the beginning of the piece called Juju White Magic by Gitte Willesen. Totally amazing. Here you go.
Yes. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So, my name is Amadou Sarr. I'm a musician, but my famous name, they call me Chili Willy. But before I do anything, I want to introduce you also the instrument I play. And this one we call molo. Molo is only one string guitar, and it's a very traditional African instrument. When all people are sleeping, then you can see even the instrument is look like you put it in the microphone. So it look like it's getting himself a very powerful in the evening. And when you play it, many people will hear it in the night. And that night, you can see the old devils are coming around in that night. But it's a very good instrument. Also, it's a guide too. When you have it, it's something like you put it in the house. Even when fire coming or anything coming, you can protect because it's a devil.
So you always have it with you?
Yes, I'm always have it with me. I'm always put it in my house to guide my house. If anything happen, can guide. Yeah. And have not we call Yininka. this was running. That is the horse running. That is the horse running. Ladies and gentlemen, this also is a, we call bee. It looks like a flute. We call it flute, but it's bee. It's African instruments. Only two holes. You can have different sound. This also, I'm used to play this since I was young. I was after the cows in the forest. If you see, I use this because the cows, they really like the sounds. If they're climbing in a tree, after then I see the whole cat disappear. I didn't see them when I climbing in the tree. When I start to play the songs, I can see one of them, they are coming, and I can see both of them, they are coming. I know where they are. Because the sounds, they are like the sound, they will come. So I will show you how to call this cows before you play the songs with the cows.
So I believe that the knowledge that Amadou Assar speaks about in this movie is very, very instructive, and it goes right to the origins of art history. In a certain way, one of the fathers of art history, Aby Warburg, was basically premising his understanding of why art even talks to us and why art affects us on the very same assumptions. Is that me? Oh yeah. Oh, I apologize. Yeah, the devil in me is the devil. Alright. Namely the idea that, as we discussed this morning, maybe art doesn't represent. Art relays energies that connect different creatures in a given situation. Aby Warburg talks about that in terms of Pathosformeln, the idea that an image doesn't primarily represent anything, but it kind of relays an emotion that is basically channeled through the image in the same way, I don't know, that like electricity would be led through a wire. Giorgio Agamben writes very beautifully about this topic in a recent book of his called On Signature, where he speaks about a particular tradition of magical and alchemical thinking, where the idea is that to understand the magic of nature, we have to understand how these energy channels run through nature. This is a diagram about signature, which is about how certain resemblances and similarities in nature indicate which objects in nature talk to each other, because they share certain qualities. In the same way, for instance, that Amadou Assar makes it very clear that when he plays to the horses, he plays the horses. Because there is a certain quality that makes a horse, namely the sound of its gallop, that is the same quality of his playing. So he's not representing the horses, he's performing the quality which defines a horse as a horse. And coming back to the debate that we had in the morning, I wouldn't even call that weirdness. I find that very constructive thinking on the level of sheer qualitative thinking. And when I say quality, I don't mean value, I mean it in the traditional philosophical sense of that which defines something as what it is. So that which is in language somehow, which escapes language, are sheer qualitative terms. That like the proper name of something that defines it as what it is by establishing a relationship to the thing. So the relationship to the horse established through that moment of playing the horse is strictly immanent to the relationship that you enter into with the horse in that moment that you play. So there is no externality, you don't step back from the world to represent it, but you perform a relationship to the world by enacting one of its key qualities, like the gallop of the horse, for instance. And so it's not just the chairness of the chair, but it's the horseness of the horse enacted in that moment of gallop. Interesting in that understanding of how meaning lies dormant, immanent to the relations to the world, is also that it forces us to reconsider our modern definitions of self and alterity. As you will have heard while listening to Amadou Assar, he makes it very clear, for instance, that the molo, the guitar, can protect you against the devil because it is a devil. And it is also part of the logic of juju amulets that an amulet can protect you against a particular devil because that very particular devil already lives in the argument, in the amulet. So it is not that, according to the logic of friends and enemies, you fight one with the other, you fight one with the one. No, you enter into a relationship with the devil that you protect yourself against by wearing that devil, in a way. So the devil within is the devil without, and therefore it only works. Yeah? So all distinctions of self and alterity become radically blurry because what you actually engage in is an immanent relationship that you inhabit in the moment when you activate it. And I believe that there is something that we deeply share when we're immersed in any kind of creative practice, which is that of entering into an immanent qualitative relationship. For instance, when I think about qualities, there is such a term as emergent qualities in scientific use to describe a problem that science is struggling with. For instance, that you can quantify and analyze what defines water as water. Yes, you can break it down into all its kind of chemical components, but this quantification and explanation logic doesn't explain why water is wet. There is absolutely no scientific explanation for the sheer quality of wetness that arguably defines water as what it is in relationship to the human skin. No, and this kind of quality that defines the whole but cannot be given through any of its parts is called an emergent quality. The sheer wetness of water and also the thinkingness of the brain. Well, you can explain how the brain works, but you cannot thereby create an organism that would actually think. So the aliveness of life, the thinkingness of thinking, the wetness of water are these emergent qualities. And I wouldn't even think of them as generic qualities, as in the weirdness, because all these qualities, of course, are radically different. Now, when we're talking about wetness, we're not talking about thinkingness. It's different sheer qualities, and they all demand different ways of engaging them. This is a Scottish Highland cow that I was sharing a space with when I was on a residency in Cove Park in Scotland earlier this summer. So I would open my windows and my curtains in the morning, and she was always there. And while I would sit down and immerse myself in language, she would just sometimes stand for hours on end in the pool, just unmoving, just being in water. So on a certain level of sympathetic magic, I felt there is a deep solidarity between the cow engaging in the sheer quality of coolness or wetness, being a pronouncedly cool cow, a cow in the state of cooling, and myself being immersed in the state of writing. So that there is a kind of a strange sympathetic resonance between being in language and being in wetness. For instance, these are sheer qualitative situations, and as such there is a kind of strange magical correspondence. It was very calming to have her around. Interestingly, a traditional way to engage sheer quality is mimesis. If we understand mimesis not in terms of representation, but in terms of radical imitation. And of all people, it's precisely Adorno who makes a big deal out of that in his aesthetic theory, where he says that one of the ways in which art can resist the regime of instrumental reason is through a solidarity with nature, which is enacted through mimesis, understood as a form of really of mimicry. So not as kind of that painting after nature would not be a form of representation, but really an attempt to imitate, to mimic the other, and in a way almost physically channel the energies of the form of the other through your wrist onto the paper, so that actually drawing after nature in a way could be understood as a magical practice of engaging in a sympathetic relationship to the shape and quality and appearance of the other. So that I've always felt that Impressionism is way more radical than Expressionism, no? In the sense that the Expressionists always talk about becoming and then stay bourgeois, and while Impressionists actually go out there and become the thing. They become the light, they become the weather, and here it's, of all people, August Macke having a good day in the zoo, which you can see, and becoming elephant and becoming bird. You know, that you can see that in this amazing drawing that the amount of different motions that his hand goes through is that there is not just one bird in his wrist. You know? There's many different birds and hats and shrubbery that kind of is channeled through his wrist. And I think that drawing is preparatory drawing for a painting which is called Being with the Elephant. So that's a notion of art as a form of being with and activating these kind of sympathetic magical relations that give you sheer qualities in the act of imitation and mimicry. As a form of solidarity with nature, and maybe as a form of resistance against an instrumental discourse that wants to quantify and organize and categorize, that you in a way precede that relationship by entering into another relationship with your environment through imitation and mimicry. So I think plein air drawing is radically underrated. It's big fun. It's one of the great privileges of our trade to be able to engage in it, and I strongly encourage it. Speaking about the relationship of the one to the other, that in a magical relationship becomes radically blurry, we also have to understand that what's really, when we think about it in bodily terms, as the inside and the outside, all these terms of course become equally blurry. No? If the other is me as well as I am in the other in the moment of a magical sympathetic resonance, we have to even understand how bodies relate to each other in that moment when the inside and the outside of the world strangely get wrapped up in each other. On the one hand, you know that as a performance artist, when you're dealing with an audience, you can only, in a way, activate the body of the audience if that body becomes your body as much as your body becomes the audience's body. I don't know, if you play live as a band, you have to play the hips of the audience. If you don't get to the hips and you play their hips, and their hips don't, and in a way, in moving and dancing, give you the rhythm back, the whole concert won't happen. No, you have to establish that kind of strange, energetic relation of sympathy. Otherwise, the experience will simply not take place. No? And which is a troubling question. How do we even understand this relationship between the different bodies, between the different objects, when one can become the other or just stay separate? This is especially troubling because we know, of course, that commodity culture equally works in that manner. No? Like when we talk about the relationship to the fetish, that is a relationship that we enact every day in the context of product culture. The same moment of schizophrenic confusion. If I buy this bottle, do I buy the woman? Is the woman in the bottle? Do I get the woman if I buy the bottle? Or is it like the other way around? Do I get the woman through the bottle, or does the bottle actually make the woman who she is? Yeah? So does the woman define the bottle, or the bottle the woman? Which here is kind of course, wrapped up in a magical cycle that is signed by Prada. So Prada rules this kind of magical cycle. It's the confusion of identity, bottle or woman, is she inside or outside? What constitutes the other? Here is controlled in a product relationship, so that this schizophrenic oscillation is bound up in a relatively controlled economical force field. When I would argue what makes art interesting is when it enters that productive confusion that the fetish produces, but it somehow unleashes it, deterritorializes it, and frees it from that kind of closed economical circuit that the magic can be captured in. So I want to, for a moment, dream of a magical oscillation that is not geared towards just selling a product, but that is experienced in its sheer schizophrenia as an unbridled energy relationship. And someone who I adore for, I believe, doing precisely that in her sculptures is Alina Shapotsnikov. There is a major retrospective, first major retrospective opening tonight in Wheels, in the Wheels Exhibition Center in Brussels, curated by Elena Filipovic. Shapotsnikov produced most of her work in the 50s and 60s and died in the early 70s of cancer after surviving 3 concentration camps during the war. Her work is deeply troubling and at the same time incredibly obscenely beautiful because it's highly charged with all kinds of emotions, but I would argue makes a very aggressive use of the potentials, the dirty potentials of the fetish, to mix the inside, the outside, the dynamics of attraction and repulsion, and going in that piece here in particular, even so far to understand the relationship of input, output, inside, outside as a tension that can be activated in an exchange of the functions of the different orifices of the body, where here a mouse becomes an asshole that shits for kisses in a strange ambivalent tension of repulsion and attraction, where defecating and kissing become sort of giving the shit, giving the kiss, giving something away, or even inserting something into the mouse become kind of strangely reversible operations, no? Which is, I think, a radical rethinking of how the body can communicate, no? What comes in, what goes out, and what kind of values we assign to that which comes in and which comes out. So it's not just abject art in the sense that it would celebrate unhygienic or abject. It radically transforms the categories in which we think input and output and something like social effect. I'll come back to her. And I would argue that in a similar way as this is a juju amulet, the object here comes to embody a particular soul. No, it's an object that is be-souled. There is an anima, a soul, an animal in this object, and this animal is activated in a social relationship. This is a beautiful sculpture by Alina Shapotnikov, where you have a kind of a mouth and a kind of a block that includes, I think, photographs of many different heads. So it's one soul becoming many souls, and it's a table lamp. So she did a lot of these lamps that were kind of magical, glowing magical fetishes that are kind of a riot of schizophrenic identity relationships, but designed as a writing desk lamp. No? So you can have this at home to illuminate your process of thinking. No? Some people have a cow outside, and you can have a lamp like this. Yeah? What I find absolutely exciting about this work is that in activating this dark side of the fetish, where it doesn't actually establish a set of values in a given economy, but where it activates a kind of a relationship where we experience radical reversibility, input becomes output, shit becomes kiss, that by using all these dynamics, she also maneuvers herself out of forms of Oedipal thinking. In the world of Alina Shapotnikov, really in a Nietzschean manner, nothing is true and everything is allowed. Yeah? Nothing is forbidden. There is no law against penis, banana, nipple lips. Yeah? So that this is not prohibited. Yeah? This is a relationship. You can't even say it's transgressive, because it transgresses no laws. No? It's a different form of enjoying sex that doesn't rely on anybody telling you that you shouldn't be doing this. Yeah? No, there is nobody telling you to not to enjoy bananas, penis, nipple lips. Yeah? You can deeply enjoy that connection because it is strictly outside any economy and outside any law. Yeah? But while it obviously activates a lot of likenesses in shapes and also inversions, you know, where the breast that you suck suddenly becomes, or the mouse that can eat becomes that which is supported by that which can be sucked, which can be, and so on. And I think I shouldn't be talking too much about this because there's an amazing video next door where all these relationships of the mouse, the breast, the animal are activated in a similarly enjoyable manner as something that is strictly beyond any laws and activates the reciprocities of that which can be touched by a mouse suddenly touches the screen of the camera. And these are the strange inversions that I'm talking about, which I think can be activated when we think about the sculpture as a magical object that, while partially working according to the logic of fetishisms, can also be unframed from these economies of fetishism towards an enjoyment that is strictly anti-Oedipal and beyond any prohibitions. Thinking about the ontological riot that an object like this produces, you know, where a relationship is established between different orifices, different substances. This is actually polyurethane, like a chemical substance together with a natural substance, together with these, it's equally plastic, no? Plastic casts of someone's mouth. So you have an object that in a way translates different substances into each other and makes them talk to each other and talk through each other. Which brings me to a very classical motif in our that is at the beginning of our Western tradition to explain how art works and how art affects us, which is practically more or less the same way of thinking that Amadou Assar explicated in his talk about his musical instruments. Here on the right we have, on your left, an image showing Orpheus at play. And Orpheus, apart from that unfortunate incident with Eurydice, had also other qualities, namely that being a son of Calliope and Apollo, and Calliope is the muse for philosophy, mathematics, and string instruments. He was pretty good at playing the fiddle or the lyra, and but had a particular emotional capacity to touch his environment, or you could say, in the light of what Amadou Assar explains, to establish these sympathetic relationships, not just between him and the environment, but between different entities in that environment, which would otherwise have to remain distinct on the ontological hierarchy. The story is that when Orpheus would play, animals, trees, and stones would come and listen. No, and that is radical to say if this is the origin of our understanding of what art can do, it is that which assumes no particular place in the ontological hierarchy and can therefore actually establish a bridge between those things that should remain ontologically different. So we're not just talking about, even if we're talking about immanence, about a homogeneous relationship between things that are somehow the same, here that relationship is even spans across those, a bridge across that which governs ontological difference. No? Stones, trees, animals similarly affected by art. Yeah. Wow. And this is in a way the beginning of our way of thinking about what art can do, a classical mythological motif that in a way, as I understand it, is a very lucid description of what happens when a work works. No, that something, that the connection is made. No, and here the connection is made in a very anarchist, radically unruly way. I don't think that the gods like that too much. You know, when somebody actually not transgresses, but this is a radical form of ontological trespassing, and as a form of translation. You know, that the different worlds are translated into each other. They are made to talk to each other. Right, here we are back. Which is not so irrational. I had this one strange experience with a friend of mine's dog when I was playing Neil Young on my guitar, and the dog just had a complete freak out. And for a moment I felt like, am I that bad? Potentially yes, but then my friend who's a teacher, she then taught the guitar to her dog. And it suddenly became clear that, I'm hoping at least, that maybe it was not my singing that upset the dog, but simply the fact that this black thing, which had been inanimate in one moment, became animate in the next. So that in its identificatory system, it for a moment couldn't place the guitar. Is this a creature or is this a thing? If it's a thing, how does it speak? If it speaks, what kind of creature are we dealing with? If it doesn't even smell? So there was this very touching moment when the dog kind of checked out the guitar to see what it was that it was actually dealing with. Yeah? And I feel on a certain level, it's exactly that thing. No? Like when we activate a relationship through a musical instrument, the animate and the inanimate suddenly overlap in a really troubling manner. No, this is pure physics. Music is pure physics and pure mathematics. But on the other hand, of course, it touches the soul. No, so the inanimate and the animate are made to talk to each other through the music that is generated through this strange black thing with a hole in the middle. Yeah? So on that level, I feel like we maybe should learn from the dog to re-understand what an ontological riot art and music actually presents, and therefore what a deeply metaphysical form of enjoyment. Someone who I actually strongly adore for bringing out that kind of slightly absurdist, slapsticky dimension of the ontological riot that the art object presents is Franz West. This is one of his early Passstücke. So basically it's a sculpture that you're asked to somehow take off the pedestal and relate to your body. Like a musical instrument, you could say, but it's a relation that, while being deeply intimate, as you see here, of course, equally remains a non-relationship. So I'm not arguing in favor of a kind of all-existential harmony. There's also something about the object of art that, even if it establishes that relationship between the animate and the inanimate, the still and the moving, it does have a cheeky form of autonomy that, even if it enters into that relationship, it's actually not exhausted by that relationship. No? And coming back to the ass and the kiss, you don't know if this is a kiss of the muse or just a piece of shit that you literally can't deal with. And a lot of these pieces are actually made out of basically the shit that gathers in the studio, that Franz West for a while just took the trash that was in the studio and put some plaster around it, and then you got these things. Yeah? So it is really like an object that kind of hovers on the threshold between all these categories of value where you cannot place it. Is it shit? Is it a valuable object? No, it's a relational object that establishes a very intimate relationship, and while it does so, still retains a certain kind of weird material autonomy. Yeah? And a reason why I strongly respect Kathy Wilkes is that she, I think, took that lesson from Franz West and ran with it. You know, while with Franz West, as enjoyable as these pieces are and as funny as these pieces are, they to some extent still remain categorical exercises in understanding the status of an artwork, while someone like Casey Wilkes risks the radical embarrassment of actually enacting these kind of everyday magical relationships through the thing, where the things on the one hand, yes, become the props that channel the story, and therefore create an emotional force field, but an emotional force field which is not really stable because she allows it to fall apart again when the object re-emerges as just a stupid thing. No? On the one hand this is magical, on the other hand it's really daft, and it risks that kind of ambivalence of creating an emotional force field. It's not even a story, it's just a feeling of being, but in such a manner that it's not secured through a cult. Like Kathy Wilkes is not the priestess in a cult, she doesn't have the authority position to transform, I don't know, wine into the blood of Christ. Like for a moment the transformation, the transubstantiation trick works, but because she lays no claim to the validation through a church, it's just her own magic. So there is no proof that this will work. No, the wine becomes the blood, but then it just becomes flat screen television again. And I find that a particular quality, that if you play the trick of magic, to not rely on the cult, but to do it alone on a limb and risk the radical embarrassment of the thing falling back from the status of a magical object into that of a banal thing. And I think it takes guts to do something like that. So. No cult, no mysticism, just the transubstantiation emotional act in its making and potential unmaking. Here is something that I want to use as a paradigm for how an artistic gesture can activate an entire environment and create a riot related to the status of objects, but also related to the input-output, inside-outside relationships, which I find crucial for sculpture. You know, the inside of a body, the outside of a body, that is one traditional source of meditation in sculpture. This is by some anonymous genius in Highland that is all about outpour and inpour. And if you then start to play the game of magical similarities and transformations, when inpour becomes inhalation, so that what comes out of the body is drawn into the body, and the ear and the pissoir suddenly become to resonate with each other. That like peeing and listening, the inpour and the input, the whole logic of the receptacle, is activated in this almost religious environment that completely transforms the logic of place. You don't know, am I in a Manhattan cocktail bar of the 1980s, and Tom Cruise will walk in any minute, or is this, I don't know what here, but you're definitely not in the toilet, this is someplace else. And you, while you do what you do in a place like that, you equally feel like you are on a spaceship to New York with a pre-Raphaelite vision in front of you and a cocktail glass in your hand. So it's a radically transformative experience created through the activation of all these sympathetical magic relationships that exist and that allow for a transformation of the relations between input, output, inpour, outpour. And just a footnote, in medieval theology, people had the problem to explain how the Holy Virgin could have kept her virginity while she received the Son of God. And the answer was that she was inseminated through her ear. That is the official Catholic doctrine. And so on that level, I find a lot of these medieval metaphysics actually intuitively enacted in this environment. This, I should have another one, sorry. Someone like Isa Genskin is similarly attuned and alert to such possibilities, of receiving inspiration through your ear, and the strange role of the ear as an orifice that can turn an entire body and building into a receptacle. Just you have a building in Graz, just add an ear, and you have a body. And interestingly, what we're talking about here in these magical relations is actually a theory of metaphor. Like when you relate one to the other, that's traditional definition of metaphor, a relation between two ontological distinct things. We say like Odysseus, who was it, a lion? Who's a lion? Let's say Odysseus is a lion. Then we compare a human to an animal, establish a relationship that brings out the quality of that person, a qualitative relationship that bridges an ontological gap. When we say walls have ears, that brings out a particular quality that she here literally enacts. That these walls have ears. She brings out a particular quality of bodiliness, and witnesshood that buildings have. They see, they hear, they are around. Buildings are receptacles, they're silent witnesses, and you can turn them into a body as a witness by just adding an ear. Fantastic piece. In a similar way that I find in the most minimalist fashion, Genskin manages to activate this confusion of the orifices. This is a window, but it's also a mouth, an eye, and an ear. Here we have an entire architectural structure that is as much speaking about an experience of architecture as about an experience of the body. Where if the window becomes an orifice, becomes an ear, becomes a building again. But just reduced to this one metaphor that brings out an existential quality that relates the building to the body. Someone else who I find incredible as a sculptor is Manfred Pernis, because he works with similar kind of magical relationships between that activate a connection between an environment and a sculpture. And he brings out the possibility and impossibility, that tension of such a relationship happening by using the most stupid object that you can possibly start with. A can, and he calls them can, Dose, just simple containers that basically as a dose, as a can, dramatize the relationship between the inside and the outside. What's in the can? Is there beer in the can? Is it juice in the can? Is it pears in the can? So the question is always what is in the can, because we don't see it. And that's precisely why the can assume all kinds of different magical functions. This was in a public art project in Hamburg in 2000, where he placed different cans in different locations in the city. So here it was outside a Taiwanese restaurant, so the can becomes a Thai dose, because there was a little window where certain elements from the Thai restaurant were put in there. So as the universal sympathetic object, the dose can enter into any relationship to its environment the moment that what is out there gets in there. Like it's a Thai dosen amulet. This was outside the railway police, so he got some of the brutal tiles from inside the railway police station out there and added some more artifacts from inside. And I think that was a Parkhaus dose. It was in the local parking house, and it resonates with the ugliness of that environment, but in a very persistent and sustained way engages in a relationship and a dialogue with the environment. I mean, that's one thing that sculpture can do, is that sculpture is very patient. Sculpture has a lot of time. It doesn't all have to happen on the night of the concert. the sculpture has, I don't know, 2-3 months of time to activate the relationship to its surroundings. No? As in the same way that the building can be a universal witness, this sculpture is witnessing its own metaphorical relationship to its environment. And another detail is that part of one of the reasons why Manfred Pernice is so fun is that he also plays with the ambiguity of the inside-outside relationship. You know? Does the bottle define the woman or the woman the bottle? And this thing is also called a Hemddose, so it's a shirt can. And the joke obviously being the ontological joke that in a shirt can, the shirt should of course be in the can, but here it's outside the can. So if the shirt is outside the can, does it make it a shirt can or should it then be inside? So it's a kind of an inside-out shirt can. Just imagine like I don't know, a can of like a baked beans can would follow that logic. Like it would be a magic baked beans can where the cans would actually be there. But, you know. This is why I find this can much more funny than Manzoni's artist shit can, because I mean as transgressive as it seems, but it's very traditional in its use of the can. So it's an artist shit can, and the artist shit still behaves properly by staying in the can, while this shirt can is much more radical in activating the inside-outside confusion that you can actually do when you operate on the basis of magic. End of second part, third part. So we understand that in its metaphorical magical relationships to the environment, sheer qualities can be brought out through and by means of sculpture. But beyond that, of course, there is also that relationship of witnessing and remembrance. We know that when they're magically activated, objects can remember. They can store memories. And a paradigmatic example is, of course, the Dreamcatcher. I mean, this is the first native hard drive recorder. No, like constantly recording data and storing it. No, this is a hard drive. No, a hard drive catching what happens in your heart. No, and it's not actually keeping the dreams away. It's just filtering and recording the dreams that you have. And as with most sculptures, there is this durational aspect to it. The Dreamcatcher is just there. So its constant presence in the room defines the spirit within the room while it just keeps on recording. And there was a bit of a renaissance of the Dreamcatcher as a paradigm in sculptural practice after the 90s. Someone who made a lot of use of the Dreamcatcher as a model is Eva Rothschild, and here just, I guess, primarily focusing on the potential receptivity of the Dreamcatcher. I mean, there's no particular story related to that Dreamcatcher, it's just hanging there. It's hanging there awaiting projections, awaiting ghosts, awaiting dreams. And of course, the sculptural aspect that is foregrounded here is just the hangingness. It's just like the existential state of strangely hanging around. A lot of witnesses, they hang around. It's a particular quality of hang that I think we don't do that enough anymore. Like in the age of hyperproductivity, the art of just hanging out and being receptive to whatever. Like in southern European countries, where also like the universal witness, of course, are the old people sitting on the benches. They're the public dream catchers. They're watching as life goes by just sitting there, in the same way that these things are just, in a strange way, ominous way, just hanging there. And eventually, as they're hanging there, of course, they get charged with particular kind of emotional valences. And this is a pretty dark. Dream catcher, and in the back you see a pretty cheerful one. It's a pretty birdy, bird cagey, flamboyant one in the back. It's a little bit on the designing side, the stuff, and I've always had some questions related to that. But at least in some of its more superficial approach to sculpture, it definitely doesn't have the Katie Wills quality of being out there on a limb risking potential complete embarrassment. This is relatively safe, but at the same time, on that level of its safe superficiality, it captures a very particular quality, namely that it is crucial about dream catchers that they just hang there. That's one of their qualities, and I think Eva Rothschild brings that hanging aroundness out in her work in a very decisive manner, even though she doesn't then fuel it with content. No, she just presents the receptacle. Someone who, of course, then charges the dream catcher with a lot of feeling is Isa Gensken. Here, that's another plinth piece with a little bit of dream catcher action on the side. But it's also activating this idea of spiritual assemblage. Now, that's what's great about dream catchers, is that it is, in the same way that we've seen with Orpheus, an ontological riot. You've got a bit of bird, a bit of stone, a bit of kind of weaving going on. No, it makes it clear that this stuff comes from different ontological fields. And I think that is something that Isa Genskin has been very radical at exploring. No? Like radical immaterial assemblage, always on the verge of decoration. Yeah? So this could also be the mad Christmas decoration, where somebody just simply couldn't stop decorating the Christmas tree. Yeah? So there is a certain kind of domestic magic to it, you know, the over-decorated Italian pizzeria, where there's no place left, and the magic of that, which I think, with a full frontal embrace of potential embarrassment, Isa Genskin is embracing here. No? She's going away from the dream catcher as sheer receptacle, as one that is already kind of sticky. It's the kind of stuff that you get for catching flies, where a lot of flies are already caught on it. No? Slightly sleazy, slightly sticky, but you still understand the logic of that kind of medium awaiting signals and then storing them. From there, we kind of get to someone like Jim Lambie, who I think was basically trying to do the same thing. That you also have the kind of hangingness and the idea, I guess, of the record becoming the witness of its own playing. The fashion, the clothes you wear, the records you listen to, becoming witnesses to a particular moment. That you connect the feeling with a particular record, and you know that you potentially really had a good night. Last night a DJ saved my life, and that actually happened, and that particular quality of that night, of a particular moment, might be stored in such an object. Here we are, of course, gravitating back to fetishism, and these are fetishes that can, of course, circulate very well in an economic system. But if I were to make a case for them, I think they still have something of the obscenity of a very particular memory, where you can imagine, yes, it was that particular night. You know, that it has some of that feeling, yeah, well, that Friday night 5 years ago, something like that. You know? Which I would say makes it partially resistant to sheer fetishism, because there is some wonky particularity to it, which points to particular memories, and therefore to memory as a quality. No memory, not just as a story, but different memories somehow feel, taste, and sound differently. You know, there are particular memories that can only be brought out by one particular song. Not because they had a different story, but it has to be that song, that smell, that taste, as a particular quality that distinguishes memories. And of course, we're always working around the logic of the assemblage fetish, you know, that where sympathetic magic, the kind of mayhem of potential relations being established, is brought out in a sculptural practice, where you really stick one thing into the other. And what is a glory hole, where something that comes out should be stuck, actually becomes an insight into a thing into which things are being stuck. And which is as physical as it is corporal. And I think a lot of the things that Isa Genskin brought out analytically in her earlier pieces, kind of playing with the different logic of architecture and the body and the role of the office, is activated here in a very playful manner. On the one hand, of course, this is highway back to fetishism, but at the same time, I would understand there to be a particular humor that points to the quality of particular experiences and memories, and therefore gives this work a certain dignity in its humor. And it's somewhat strangely like the jacket that you don't want to throw away because you just remember when you wore it. And you refuse to wash it, this kind of thing. And I once remember hearing an interview with Charlie Watts from the Rolling Stones, who got very upset when someone finally tuned his drum set. And in the process, apparently they opened the drums and some confetti from a concert that happened 20 years ago fell out of the drum set. And that it only had that sound because in a similar way as in certain kind of Asian restaurants where the soup has to be cooked in the same pot for 20 years to get that particular aroma, yeah? That smell, that taste, that kind of charge. And I feel like someone like Lambie is gesturing towards that quality. A video that I might show at the end, I'm just gesturing towards it, is it is something about pointing to these qualities and memories that has a lot to do with, I think, sharing communally. Because if we don't understand this as a fetish that needs to be sold, but as something like a memorial to a good Saturday night, it's also a way of sharing a quality together. And I had this experience when I was in Cove Park again with those cows. Really beautiful. There were 3 cows queuing up to scratch their back on that low branch. It was amazing. You know, the sheer quality of the itch relief, but then communally shared. It was a Sunday afternoon, and they had all assembled there to scratch their back on that. Like one scratches, moves away, the other comes, scratches their back, and there is a kind of this immanent relationship to a feeling, where what you share is not a story, but the sheer quality of itch relief. And I think that is a social utopian model. You know, sharing not the means of production, but sharing the means of the production of a particular quality in relationship to your environment. You know, itch relief. Again, learn from the cows. I want to propose one last thought. A lot of this so far has been very cheerful, and the devils that I've invoked are quite pleasant devils of sex and a good night out and all these things, or wetness. Of course, a lot of the devils that travel from body to body in our society are not particularly pleasant. No? There is a line in Ibsen's A Doll's House where one of the characters who got a sexual disease from his father and basically just simply says, you know, in every family a merciless law of retribution is at work, pointing to the fact that actually what travels from body to body is the disease of the previous generation. You know? What we're talking about here in these strange moments of energy transfers is also what psychoanalysis calls transference. You know, when the feelings, when someone hangs their shit on you, no, and you can do nothing about it. Someone had a problem, they dump it on you, and then hell, it's your problem too. No, and usually it's something that you cannot deal with because, well, it wasn't your problem in the first place. No, it was maybe your parents' problem. They didn't figure it out. No, it's your problem. What shall you do with it? And maybe they couldn't deal with it because their parents already couldn't deal with it. No, that's the kind of demon that travels through society, where certain moments of pain and trauma become ghosts. No, because they cannot be put to rest. And ghosts, as we know, and demons that cannot be put to rest, they travel from body to body to body. And so when we open our channels up to sympathetic encounters, of course you never know. You might get the kiss, but you might also get the kiss of shit. Yeah? That someone actually transfers something to you in that kiss, which they couldn't handle, and then leave you with. Yeah? So that is the logic of ghosts, and in our cultural environments where we interact emotionally, expose ourselves emotionally to the others' force fields, of course what we end up in is a kind of demoncracy. Yeah? So where these demons are circulating throughout the entire society. But what do we do with those devils and demons when we know that we are constantly channeling them? Is there a way to deal with those demons that art could offer us? And then I'm not really talking in therapeutical terms, but I'm more talking in terms of a general social ecology. How are we dealing with our devils? Are we just going to pass them on to say, okay, this was not my problem, now it's the Iraqis' problem? Or can there be a responsible use of the magic of dealing with our own demons? And I want to point to the paradigmatic function of the ghost trap that the Ghostbusters are using. as a model for what sculpture could be and do. The interesting thing, and especially as a way to describe what this work might actually be doing, no? Because the ghost trap is a device for catching ghosts, but then it's not a device for cathartic release. So the ghost trap doesn't give you the illusion of catharsis. It doesn't pretend that the ghost is gone. No, the ghost is in there, and then you have to store it well. No? In the same way that I would argue in a sculpture like that, this work promises no catharsis, no cleansing. No, it's not a social artifact that promises after this society will be cleansed. Like the monument, you put a big, you erect a big phallus in Trafalgar Square and say like, okay, now we're done with the war. Now they were fought for good reasons. We can now forget about the dead because they've died for good reasons. No, as if a monument could put the dead at rest. Now, of course, the ghosts still keep wandering. No? So against this fantasy of being done with the dead that I think the monument always indulges in, I'm thinking about a way of relating to ghosts that arrests them, that stops them from traveling, but doesn't even pretend that we could cleanse ourselves from them, but says, no, here, the ghost is in the thing. That's where the devil is, and here it is, in front of you, in the museum. You can find all the ghosts that have been caught. No? It's like, so where the museum becomes a little bit like the storage chamber of the Ghostbusters, no? Where you can see all the ghosts that have been caught. Of course, it's a very precarious situation. We know you press the wrong button, the ghost comes out again. But if we just think about the possibilities of catching ghosts in a non-cathartic way, you know, that is actually still, the shit is still in there, you know? And it still smells, you know? That is a way of being socially responsible to say like, no, the shit is still in between us. We cannot deny that the elephant is not in the corner. Here the elephant is right there, but we caught it, we arrested it, we stopped it from running away. Yeah? But still, of course, we're exposed to the smell. Yeah? Incredible scene. Yeah? And it's also interesting that to catch a ghost, like in a museum or in a library where ghosts usually linger, in art shows, and there's a lot of ghosts, it takes a communal effort. This is a bad image, but you need your photon gun, and it gets easier when you have several people catching the ghost, and then maneuver it over the trap, and then it gets sucked in. So it's it's an effort of collective intelligence to catch a ghost and to arrest it. Here you see it. No? So it's different people. It's a form of collaborative art practice, catching a ghost and trapping it. So the general intellect is involved. You have to know how to catch a ghost together. One last thought that I want to add is when a ghost is caught, in what state of latency does it exist? And what are we when we are the receptacles and catchers of ghosts? And I want to bring it back to Alina Shapotnikov in this way. This is a fantastic piece by Shapotnikov, which is called Alina's Funeral. And as I said, she survived 3 concentration camps. And a lot of her friends' photographs, portrait photographs, are in these polyester blobs up there. And you see a lot of faces in there. And down here there's a face of herself and a concentration camp prisoner uniform. And what I find so strong about the piece, and also the fact that she did pieces like that and pieces like this, is that on the one hand, there is such a strong acknowledgement of how pain is collectively experienced physically. No, I mean, we mentioned Maurice Merleau-Ponty earlier, but when he talks about the flesh of the world as that moment where we experience being in the world as being with others, the fact that yes, we live and die together, that is a kind of a very subliminal level of consciousness, which I would argue she activates here magically in that sculpture, because she doesn't only represents it, but she actually uses it as a medium. No? classically, the idea of suffering together, being part of the flesh of the world, is represented in the Pietà images, where similar as in the Shapotnikov, you can see this structural resemblance here. Individual bodies disappear, and all you have is this kind of strange mess of bodies enmeshed in each other, where sometimes you don't even know where the arms and legs are coming from. No, this is suffering, this is mourning as a state of existential togetherness, where my pain is the pain of the other. But more going beyond representation, I think Shapotnikov turns the quality into a medium. So when the quality that is brought out here in the Botticelli is the messiness of mourning, she actually makes a mess. She uses the polyester, the messiness, the fleshly messiness, as a medium through which she activates those energies. And that kind of pain that travels in a society until it's caught in a work like that. No? I mean, the people are still dying in this mess, but they're also remembered as those who are still dying even when they live on. That the survivors, even when they survive the traumatic situation, inside they're still dying. And it's kind of living while inside you something is dying that ties you back to all those who maybe have died, as a feeling that is activated as a quality here, in a manner that I would argue goes beyond representation, because it is deeply channeled through the logic of that messy medium. And just to end it, I also think this is a fantastic Veronese image that is in the Pinacoteca in Milano. When we think about human entanglement, of course there's the pain, but there's also the sexuality and the corruption. With the pretext for this image is the finding of Moses, which happens here. But actually what happens around is all forms of human entanglement. Basically there's a lot of flute playing, flower picking, reading of musical scores together. And if you look at the old guy behind the tree and the young guy who's conspicuously close behind his back. So the longer you look at this image, which is actually a kind of pretends to be cheekily an image of a regular family society, actually everyone is doing it with everyone in this image. So there is a kind of strange understanding of how the being inside the social means that all these bodies are strangely inside each other. That on a certain level we might have to be facing something like an existential corruption where all the energy flows from these bodies leads to other bodies, and acknowledging the joy and pain of the social might have a lot to do with also the logic of all these bodily connected where each person becomes a channel for the energy of the other. And somehow I believe that on that level we can find back to that particular quality that Shapotnikov activates in her work. That this kind of strange logic of one thing leads to another. That we can see here in the Veronese. Well, we don't know how it happened, but somehow one thing led to another, and then they got together. And this kind of strange slipping and sliding, which is entirely unwitting, unintentional, uncontrollable, but still so deeply defines the social, I would say could be a logic that sculpture also engages in when it allows one thing to slip into another. So, to come to an end, what have I tried to argue? That if we understand artworks and artifacts not just as representing this or that meaning or value, but really as relays, as channels for social energies, on the one hand, this can have a descriptive function, that a work can describe an existing social relationship, but at the same time magical objects have that riot function built into them, that they can inverse and reverse all kinds of social relationships and thereby establish bridges and relations that are not as such given. No, on the one hand, relationships that are already given in an environment can be activated, speaker audience, but at the same time there can be multiple ways in which what goes in and what comes out and what comes in and what goes out are kind of directed in different directions, allowing for the very mass of the social to articulate itself, both in a joyful, anti-Oedipal way that defies all prohibition, but also on the level of remembrance, where sculpture actually allows us to acknowledge the presence of all the ghosts. No? Like everybody hurts, yeah, and the hurting travels from body to body in society unless somebody puts out the ghost trap and says, like, at least it's not in your head, you're not imagining things. This is actually what happened. Yes, they slept together and boom, there it is. Yeah? So on that level, I believe art can activate a social environment, transform the energy flows, bring out particular qualities, record them, and on that level actually can play a very important role in catching ghosts, preventing demons from traveling by simply allowing their presence in a thing.